Kristen stared in disbelief as her neighbor, the tyrannical HOA officer, Mrs. Henderson, stomped on her carefully crafted pumpkin display. Little did the heartless woman know, those pumpkins were destined for the local children's hospital. As Kristen watched her hard work reduced to a smashed orange mess, a fire ignited within her. This was war. Kristen glared out the window as Mrs. Henderson strode across her lawn, the sour expression on the older woman's face telegraphing her intentions. Kristen braced herself, knowing the inevitable confrontation was about to begin. The doorbell rang, and Kristen took a deep breath before opening the door. "Hello, Mrs. Henderson. How can I help you today?" The HOA president's thin lips pinched into an even tighter line. "You know exactly why I'm here, Kristen. Those pumpkins on your porch are a complete eyesore and a violation of our neighborhood covenants." Kristen tried to remain calm. "But Mrs. Henderson, those pumpkins are for a charity event at the children's hospital. I spent weeks carving and decorating them to bring joy to the sick kids." Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "I don't care what they're for. They're unsightly and need to be removed immediately." "Please, can't we compromise?" Kristen pleaded. "I promise I'll make sure they're taken down right after the hospital event on Saturday." "Absolutely not." Mrs. Henderson raised a bony finger. "Those pumpkins come down today, or I'll have no choice but to fine you." Kristen's heart sank. She knew better than to argue with the stern-faced woman. "All right, fine. I'll take them down." "See that you do." Mrs. Henderson turned and marched back across the lawn, her heels clicking on the pavement. Blinking back tears of frustration, Kristen stepped outside and began gently removing the pumpkins from the porch. She'd worked so hard on them, carving intricate designs and adorning them with ribbons and boughs. The children at the hospital were going to love them. Just as Kristen was placing the last pumpkin on the ground, Mrs. Henderson's shrill voice rang out. "What do you think you're doing?" Kristen whirled around to see the HOA president striding back toward her, a look of fury on her face. "I thought I told you to remove those eyesores." "I am removing them, Mrs. Henderson," Kristen said wearily. "But I need a little time to carefully pack them up for the hospital event on Saturday." "I don't care about any hospital event." Mrs. Henderson snapped. "Those pumpkins are coming down, and they're coming down now." Before Kristen could react, the older woman lunged forward and began stomping on the pumpkins, crushing them beneath her feet. Kristen watched in horror as her beautiful creations were reduced to a smashed orange mess. "No," Kristen cried, but Mrs. Henderson continued her rampage, oblivious to the purpose behind the display. When the last pumpkin had been destroyed, Mrs. Henderson straightened up, a look of triumph on her face. "There, that's better. Now clean up this mess and make sure it doesn't happen again." Kristen stared at the ruined pumpkins, her heart sinking. All her hard work, all the joy she'd hoped to bring the sick children, gone in an instant. And the worst part was, Mrs. Henderson had no idea what she'd done. Kristen stared in stunned silence as Mrs. Henderson walked away, leaving her surrounded by the smashed remnants of her pumpkin display. Tears of frustration and anger burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Gritting her teeth, Kristen knelt down and began carefully scooping up the destroyed pumpkins, her heart aching with every broken piece. Those pumpkins were supposed to bring joy to the sick children at the hospital, and now they would never see them. As Kristen worked, a plan began to form in her mind. She couldn't let Mrs. Henderson's callous actions go unchallenged. This was about more than just a few pumpkins. It was about standing up to the tyranny of the HOA and defending her community. Once the mess was cleaned up, Kristen hurried inside and powered on her laptop. She began furiously typing, composing a scathing email to the entire HOA board, detailing Mrs. Henderson's actions and the charitable purpose behind the pumpkin display. She made sure to include the heartbreaking news that the children at the hospital would now be deprived of the joy the pumpkins were meant to bring. Kristen's fingers flew across the keyboard, her anger fueling her every word. By the time she was finished, The email was a damning indictment of Mrs. Henderson's cruelty and the HOA's heavy-handed approach to enforcing their rules. With a deep breath, Kristen hit send, then leaned back in her chair, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over her. If the HOA wouldn't listen to reason, maybe they would listen to the outrage of the entire community. The next morning, Kristen awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she picked it up and saw a flood of notifications, emails, social media messages, and missed calls, all expressing outrage over the pumpkin incident. Kristen's heart soared as she scrolled through the messages, each one more impassioned than the last. Neighbors she'd barely spoken to before were rallying to her cause, condemning Mrs. Henderson's actions and demanding the HOA take action. Just as Kristen was about to reply to a particularly heartfelt message, her doorbell rang. She hurried to the door, wondering who could be calling at this hour, and found her across the street neighbor, Mrs. Wilkins, standing on her doorstep, a determined expression on her face. "Kristen, I heard what happened with those pumpkins," Mrs. Wilkins said without preamble, "and I think it's time we did something about it." Kristen felt a surge of hope. If Mrs. Wilkins was on her side, maybe there was a chance of standing up to the HOA's tyranny after all. Kristen stared at Mrs. Wilkins, a glimmer of hope stirring in her chest. "You want to help?" The older woman nodded firmly. "Absolutely. That display was for a good cause, and what Mrs. Henderson did was just plain wrong." Kristen felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't just let this go." "Well, you certainly got the entire neighborhood riled up," Mrs. Wilkins said with a wry smile. "I've never seen so many people up in arms about an HOA violation before." Kristen nodded, remembering the flood of messages she'd received that morning. "Everyone's so angry about what happened. I just hope we can channel that into something positive." "I think we can," Mrs. Wilkins said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Now, tell me your plan." Kristen hesitated, then launched into an explanation of the idea that had been brewing in her mind. "I want to organize a community protest at the next HOA meeting. Something big and bold that will force them to listen." Mrs. Wilkins nodded approvingly. "I like it. What did you have in mind?" "Well, I was thinking we could recreate the pumpkin display, only on an even bigger scale," Kristen said, her excitement building. "And instead of just pumpkins, we could include decorations and signs highlighting the charitable cause." "That's brilliant," Mrs. Wilkins exclaimed. "And I bet we could get a whole group of volunteers to help set it up." Kristen felt a grin spreading across her face. "Exactly. And when Mrs. Henderson and the rest of the HOA board see what they've done, they'll have no choice but to listen." "Count me in," Mrs. Wilkins said, reaching out to give Kristen's hand a squeeze. "This is going to be epic." Kristen felt a surge of determination. "All right, then let's get to work. We've got a lot of planning to do." Over the next few days, Kristen and Mrs. Wilkins sprang into action, reaching out to their neighbors and rallying an ever-growing army of volunteers. Word of their planned protests spread like wildfire through the community, and soon Kristen's inbox was flooded with messages of support and offers to help. As the day of the HOA meeting approached, Kristen could barely contain her excitement. This was their chance to stand up to the tyranny of the HOA and defend their community. And this time, Mrs. Henderson wouldn't be able to ignore them. The night of the HOA meeting arrived, and Kristen could barely contain her nerves as she and Mrs. Wilkins put the finishing touches on their elaborate pumpkin display. Dozens of volunteers had turned out to help, and the result was a truly stunning sight. Towering pumpkins, intricately carved with designs and messages, surrounded the community center where the meeting was being held. Strings of twinkling lights and colorful banners added to the festive atmosphere, and a large banner in the center proclaimed "Pumpkins for Charity," stomped by the HOA. As the crowd began to gather, Kristen could feel the tension in the air. Neighbors who had previously been content to keep their heads down were now eager to stand up and be heard. This is it, Mrs. Wilkins said, giving Kristen's arm a reassuring squeeze. Time to show the HOA what our community is made of. Kristen nodded, her heart pounding. Let's do this. They joined the crowd as they filed into the community center, the pumpkin display looming in the background. Kristen scanned the room, searching for any sign of Mrs. Henderson, but the HOA president was nowhere to be seen. The meeting began with the usual routine of approving minutes and discussing financial reports, but the tension in the room was palpable. Finally, the floor was open for public comments, and Kristen stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. As many of you know, last week my pumpkin display, which was intended to bring joy to the children at the local hospital, was callously destroyed by our HOA president, Mrs. Henderson. A wave of murmurs and boos rippled through the crowd, and Kristen felt a surge of encouragement. Mrs. Henderson's actions were not only heartless, but they also demonstrate a disturbing pattern of disregard for our community's values and needs. Kristen continued, her voice growing stronger. This is not the first time the HOA has prioritized rigid enforcement of their rules over common decency and compassion. She gestured towards the pumpkin display outside. That's why we're here tonight, to show the HOA that our community will not stand for this kind of behavior. These pumpkins were meant to bring smiles to sick children, and Mrs. Henderson destroyed that opportunity without a second thought. Kristen paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. We are better than this. We are a community of caring, compassionate people, and we deserve to be treated with respect, not trampled on by the very people who are supposed to represent us. A cheer rose up from the crowd, and Kristen felt a surge of pride. She had their attention now, and she wasn't about to let it go. So tonight, we're asking the HOA to make amends. We want an apology, and we want a commitment to work with us, not against us, to make our neighborhood a better place for everyone. Kristen stepped back, and the crowd erupted into applause. Mrs. Henderson was nowhere to be seen, but Kristen knew that her message had been heard. As the thunderous applause died down, Kristen scanned the room, searching for any sign of Mrs. Henderson. The HOA president was still nowhere to be seen, and Kristen couldn't help but wonder if she was deliberately avoiding the meeting. Just as Kristen was about to step back, the side door of the community center burst open, and Mrs. Henderson strode in, her face flushed with anger. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, her gaze sweeping across the room. Who authorized this display? The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning towards the furious HOA president. Kristen stepped forward, her chin held high. I did, Mrs. Henderson, she said, her voice steady. And I think I speak for the entire community when I say that we're tired of your heavy-handed tactics and complete disregard for our needs. Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. How dare you? Those pumpkins were a blatant violation of our neighborhood covenants, and I had every right to have them removed. But you didn't just remove them, Mrs. Henderson, Kristen countered, her voice rising. You stomped on them, destroying a display that was meant to bring joy to sick children at the hospital. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, and Mrs. Henderson's face flushed an even deeper shade of red. That's a lie, she spat. I had no idea those pumpkins were for charity. All I saw was an unsightly display that needed to be removed. Well, now you know, Kristen said, her eyes narrowing. And I think it's time you took responsibility for your actions. Mrs. Henderson opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a loud voice rang out from the back of the room. She's right, Mrs. Henderson. We all saw what you did, and we're not going to let you get away with it. Kristen turned to see Mrs. Wilkins striding towards the front of the room, her expression fierce. This community has had enough of your bullying tactics, Mrs. Wilkins continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. We've put up with your petty rules and arbitrary enforcement for far too long. Mrs. Henderson's lips thinned into a tight line. I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Wilkins. I was simply upholding the covenants of this neighborhood, as is my duty as HOA president. Upholding the covenants. Mrs. Wilkins scoffed. More like abusing your power to make our lives miserable. Well, not anymore. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, and Kristen felt a surge of pride. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. The moment when the community finally stood up to the tyranny of the HOA. As the noise died down, Mrs. Wilkins turned to Kristen, a triumphant grin on her face. So, what's the plan, Kristen? Kristen took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. We're taking this to the next level, she declared, her voice ringing out across the room. It's time to demand a change in the HOA leadership. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause at Kristen's declaration, and she felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was it, the moment they had been building towards. Kristen turned to face Mrs. Henderson, who stood at the front of the room, her face a mask of barely contained fury. Mrs. Henderson, you have abused your power as HOA president for far too long. Your actions have shown a complete disregard for the needs and values of this community, and we will no longer stand for it. The older woman's eyes narrowed. You can't do this. I am the duly elected president of this HOA, and I will not be bullied or intimidated by a group of malcontents. That's where you're wrong, Mrs. Henderson, Kristen shot back, her voice ringing with conviction. This community has spoken, and we demand a change in leadership. We want someone who will work with us, not against us, to make this neighborhood a better place for everyone. The crowd roared its approval, and Kristen felt a surge of momentum. She turned to the other members of the HOA board, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of unease and uncertainty. And to the rest of the board, you have a choice to make. Do you stand with Mrs. Henderson and her outdated, heavy-handed approach, or do you stand with us, the people you're supposed to serve? The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, casting anxious glances at one another. Kristen could see the wheels turning in their minds as they weighed the consequences of siding with the increasingly unpopular Mrs. Henderson. After a moment of tense silence, one of the younger board members, a woman named Sarah, stood up. I'm with the community on this one, she said, her voice firm. Mrs. Henderson's actions were unacceptable, and I won't be a part of it anymore. Another board member, an older man named Mr. Tanaka, nodded in agreement. I have to agree. This has gone on long enough. It's time for a change. Mrs. Henderson's face contorted with fury as one by one, the other board members voiced their support for the community's demands. Kristen watched, her heart pounding, as the power structures that had once seemed so unassailable began to crumble. Finally, when the last board member had spoken, Kristen stepped forward again, her gaze sweeping across the room. It's time to put it to a vote. All those in favor of removing Mrs. Henderson as HOA president and electing new leadership, raise your hand. Every hand in the room shot up, and Kristen felt a surge of triumph. They had done it. They had taken on the tyranny of the HOA and won. As the meeting adjourned and the crowd began to disperse, Kristen found herself surrounded by a group of her neighbors, all of them beaming with pride and gratitude. Thank you, Kristen, Mrs. Wilkins said, pulling her into a warm embrace. You showed us that we can make a difference when we stand together. Kristen felt a lump in her throat as she looked around at the faces of her community. This was what it was all about, people coming together to fight for what they believed in, and to make their neighborhood a better place for everyone. As she made her way home, Kristen couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration and renewed purpose. The battle might be won, but the war was far from over. There was still so much work to be done, but she knew that with the support of her community, anything was possible. In the days following the dramatic HOA meeting, the neighborhood was abuzz with a newfound energy and sense of purpose. Kristen found herself at the center of it all. Her once modest pumpkin display, now a symbol of the community's triumph over the tyranny of the HOA. As the newly elected HOA board members set to work dismantling the old regime and implementing much-needed reforms, Kristen turned her attention to the task of salvaging what she could from the destroyed pumpkins. With the help of a group of eager volunteers, she carefully collected the remnants and set to work transforming them into something new. The idea came to her one night as she was lying awake, unable to sleep. Why not turn the smashed pumpkins into a work of art? A tangible representation of the community's resilience and refusal to be silenced. Kristen shared her vision with Mrs. Wilkins, who immediately jumped on board. Together, they enlisted the help of local artists and craftspeople, who lent their skills and creativity to the project. In the weeks that followed, the community center's once barren walls were transformed into a vibrant mosaic made up of the broken shards of the destroyed pumpkins. Kristen watched in awe as the disparate pieces came together to form a stunning, multifaceted mural, a testament to the power of unity and the enduring spirit of the neighborhood. As the completion of the mural drew near, Kristen couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. Just a few short weeks ago, she had been utterly devastated by Mrs. Henderson's callous actions, her heart sinking at the thought of the children who would be deprived of the joy the pumpkins were meant to bring. But now, thanks to the unwavering support and determination of her community, that devastation had been transformed into something truly remarkable. The mural not only honored the original purpose of the pumpkin display, but also served as a powerful symbol of the community's refusal to be silenced or cowed by those in positions of authority. As the final touches were put in place and the community gathered to admire the finished work, Kristen felt a swell of pride and gratitude. This was more than just a piece of art. It was a testament to the power of collective action, a reminder that when people come together, they can overcome even the most daunting challenges. And as Kristen watched her neighbors, young and old, longtime residents and newcomers alike, marveling at the vibrant, intricate mural, she knew that this was just the beginning. The fight to reclaim their community was far from over, but with the strength and determination of this remarkable group of people behind her, Kristen knew that anything was possible. In the weeks that followed the dramatic HOA meeting, the community's newfound energy and sense of purpose continued to grow. With Mrs. Henderson and her cronies ousted from power, the newly elected board members set to work implementing a series of much-needed reforms. Gone were the petty rules and heavy-handed enforcement that had long plagued the neighborhood. In their place, a renewed focus on community engagement, neighborhood events, and supporting local charities and initiatives. It was a transformation that Kristen and her fellow residents could scarcely have imagined just a short time ago. And at the heart of this transformation was the stunning mural that now adorned the walls of the community center, a vibrant, ever-evolving testament to the power of community and the enduring spirit of the neighborhood. As Kristen stood before the mural, running her fingers over the intricate patterns and designs, she couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. What had started as a simple pumpkin display, a gesture of goodwill and charity, had blossomed into a full-fledged revolution against the tyranny of the HOA. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said from behind her, and Kristen turned to see Mrs. Wilkins standing there, a warm smile on her face. "It is," Kristen replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I never could have imagined that something so devastating could lead to something so incredible." Mrs. Wilkins nodded, her gaze sweeping across the mural. "That's the thing about this community, Kristen. We may get knocked down, but we always find a way to come back stronger than ever." Kristen felt a surge of pride and gratitude. "And it's all thanks to you, Mrs. Wilkins. I couldn't have done any of this without your support and leadership." The older woman waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, my dear. This was a team effort, plain and simple. We all played our part in making this happen." She paused, her expression turning more serious. "And you know, Kristen, this is just the beginning. With a new HOA board in place, I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot more positive changes around here." Kristen nodded, a grin spreading across her face. "I can't wait. This community deserves nothing less than the best, and I'm excited to see what the future holds." As the two women stood there, admiring the mural and the transformed community center, Kristen couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder. Who would have thought that a simple pumpkin display could have led to such a profound transformation? But as she looked around at the smiling faces of her neighbors, Kristen knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for a better community was far from over, but with the unwavering support and determination of the people she loved, she knew that anything was possible. And as the afternoon light filtered in through the windows, casting a warm glow over the mural, Kristen couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude and hope for the future. This was their story, and they were just getting started.